I'm Chef Susan O'Dell. Welcome to the Foodell Kitchen. If you ever want to deep fat fry, there's a few tricks of the trade that you need to know about, not only for safety, but to make your food taste really good. First of all, let's look at the equipment that we need to do this. I've got a large pot on the stove. I like to have a nice wide mouth so that I can look in and I can get enough food in there so it doesn't take me forever to fry everything. Today we're going to do onion rings, by the way. But I want it small enough so that it doesn't take gallons and gallons of oil either. I want my oil to be at a depth of a couple of inches preferably. There's also shallow frying, which you can typically do in a skillet. It just uses less oil where you don't submerge the foods. Here we're deep fat frying, but it's really the same method. Here I have a baking tray and I've put just a wire rack that fits inside on top. When I take my food out of the hot oil, I like to put it on the wire rack and let any excess oil drip through. If you put it on paper towel, sometimes the food just reabsorbs the oil and it gets kind of greasy. I've got a skimmer. This is going to help me get my food out of the oil, and also if I have any little bits floating around that start to blacken and burn, I can scoop those out quickly. I've got my food, I've got a batter, and I've got my onion ring. And finally, I have a thermometer. This is really important. You can do it without a thermometer, but it's a little bit of guesswork. There are a couple of kinds. This is a good old-fashioned deep fry candy thermometer, and all that means is it goes up to a very high temperature. Typically, you're going to deep fat fry at a temperature where your oil temperature is about 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Some recipes may call for a little bit less, or probably not more than that, but it's typically around 375. This has a little clip, this particular thermometer, that I can sit right inside my pot. The only problem with it is it kind of gets in the way sometimes when you're frying. This is a little high-end thermometer. I really love it, but graduate to this after you've done this a few times and see if you really need it. It's pricey, but it works fabulously. It's got an infrared on it. All I do is I hold it over my oil and it tells me the temperature on a regular basis. It's 355 degrees right now. We're really close. And I can keep doing that. After you start to fry, you want to make sure that you take some food out and you bring your oil back to temperature, back to 375 degrees before you add more. That's just really critical so that you don't just get the outside of whatever it is you're frying nice and charred, but the inside of the food cooks also. So let's get started. Okay, I've got a nice beer batter here for my onion rings. I've tossed my onions in a little bit of flour just to get them started, and I'm going to just put a few, not too many, in the batter. I'm going to go straight from the batter into the frying pan, if you will. I've already checked my temperature. We're up to the required 375 degrees. So I've got my onion rings. I'm coating them in the batter. Then I just want to drip off any excess, and then I'm going to gently put them in. If you prefer, use tongs for this. You can see how quickly they start to brown. I'm going to keep an eye on them and I'm going to flip them over in just a minute after they brown for about a minute on one side. Don't crowd the pan too much. Give them some room to roam. And just start turning them slowly as they start to brown. Now remember, any little bit of water is going to make your oil pop, and that's when oil becomes really dangerous. So even if you have condensation on a lid maybe, or a little bit on your hands after I just washed mine, be very careful because that water will tend to make this oil spit and it can burn you very, very badly. Oh, this looks good. All right, these are looking delightfully brown and delicious. Looks like we have a good afternoon snack here going. I'm going to take them out and put them directly on my baking rack over my baking tray to cool. As soon as I take anything savory out of the fryer, I like to give it a little salt. The salt tends to stick to the outside, especially for something like onion rings where you want a good salty crunch. Before I fry my second batch of onions, I'm going to scoop out any floating bits that are in my oil. Otherwise, they might burn and give a bad taste to the oil. And I'm going to make sure my oil comes back up to the 375 degree temperature that I want to use for frying. The oil that I've used today is canola oil. Canola oil has a really high smoke point, meaning that you can heat it up to 375 degrees without it creating a lot of smoke. Peanut oil is really also good for frying, as is coconut oil. Once you've finished frying with all of your excess oil, you can strain it through a fine mesh sieve. Be sure it's cold when you do this. Let it just sit on the stove and cool off by itself. It's very, very hot and dangerous. Strain it and then you can reuse it once. I usually use my oil twice before discarding it. Otherwise it gets that kind of smoky, burnt flavor to it and it makes the food taste not as good as it could be. If you discard it, I like to discard it in the trash. Don't ever pour it down your sink. Your plumber won't like you for that. Enjoy your onion rings. Bon appetit.
Frying introduction of video 7 of 7. Yay!